Welcome to Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I'm Joshua Sharfstein, Vice Dean for Public Health Practice and Community Engagement, and a former health commissioner here in Baltimore. Our goal is to bring evidence and experience to illuminate critical public health issues. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Smith Rogers, producer of Public Health on Call. Today, Stephanie Desmond talks to Tom Burke, an emeritus professor at Johns Hopkins and a former federal and state environmental official, about how we can get a handle on climate change despite a recent Supreme Court ruling on the EPA and a stalemate in Congress over funding game-changing policies. Let's listen. Tom Burke, thanks so much for joining me.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I really wanted you on the program to discuss the blow that the Supreme Court has dealt to the powers of the EPA. And we will get to that. But there's been a lot of talk about climate change lately, about failed legislation, the lack of support. It's all happening when there's heat waves and fires and all this stuff going on. And so I guess my question to you is, what can be done by President Biden himself to keep us from going off this sort of climate cliff?
Great question. And you're right. Right now, there just seems to be a perfect storm of really, really tough weather, extreme events here in Europe. Today, we're under a red heat alert in Baltimore, for instance. And yet it also seems like the sky is falling in terms of really having the political will and the budget to move forward and get things done. There's a call for President Biden to declare a climate emergency so that he can use emergency powers, for instance, to regulate emissions from oil and gas drilling or take some other measures. But that may be a step in the right direction, but that's not going to get us to the kind of solutions we want.
How do we get to the solutions we want?
Well, first of all, you have to see, what happened with the Supreme Court decision? And is that the end of EPA powers? And it's absolutely not. EPA still has a toolbox to regulate plants, to look at other pollutants, and hopefully to provide incentives. It was a lawsuit that kind of pulls in the power of EPA to take on big systemic problems with things like our power grid and forbids them from pushing forms of energy generation. And EPA, quite frankly, and this is personal for me because I was there in the Obama administration when we got the Clean Power Plan up and running. And then it was stayed back in 2016. So what a lot of people don't realize is that Supreme Court decision doesn't really change much right now because things were in limbo, but it does have implications for the future. And coupled with the budget challenges, coupled with the actions of Senator Manchin and the entire Republican Senate, we really are stymied in terms of some very positive things like incentivizing electric vehicles and things like that. But there's still so much we can do. So let's take it one step at a time. Well, what are the big three in greenhouse gas emissions? And coal-burning power plants were absolutely at the top of the list. Vehicles, our own cars, for instance, were second. And then third is emissions from oil and gas explorations and, quite frankly, the petrochemical complex. And EPA still has broad authority there in terms of the mileage standards and working with the auto manufacturers in terms of working to limit methane emissions from oil and gas exploration, and they're moving forward there. But I think what President Biden would like to do is continue the movement to sustainable sources of energy. As an environmentalist, as somebody so closely involved in this, the real gut-wrenching thing is this just puts the brakes on things that were moving in such a positive direction with renewable energy, solar and wind and electric vehicles by removing the incentives and taking away the budget that, frankly, this administration was really hoping for. My good colleague, Gina McCarthy, who worked with me at EPA, who was the presidential climate advisor, really had a great vision, as did President Biden, for really changing the way we generate energy, but more than that, providing a real economic boost to the country. And so many things got in the way, not to mention the global scarcity of oil and the huge inflation challenge that we have now. But there are still things that we can do. States can still be leaders. I'm an old state official from New Jersey. New Jersey is a leader in doing things. Maryland has been a leader in taking steps. We're a coastal state with the Bay. We're very fragile. And so there's still a lot of hope. And, there's a lot of hype right now, but I think it's time to start thinking. And we in the public health community, we have to have a voice. Come on now. Our kids are suffering. We see the health effects right away. Every day in the ER, you can see kids with exacerbated childhood asthma. You can see elderly with heat stroke. It's really very dangerous right now. We are in the height of a global heat wave. And what we had predicted for the future is now. We got to do stuff.
So back to the Supreme Court for a moment. The ruling said that the EPA can no longer do what?
Well, it still has to be dissected. It's interpreted as saying EPA cannot regulate greenhouse gases. But the Clean Power Plan, which had been already stayed, incentivized the switch to alternative forms of energy. And actually, it has been, even without being in place, market forces combined with the inevitability of regulation of greenhouse gases led the power industry to understand what was coming. And more than 290 coal-burning power plants, including some right here in our neighborhood in Baltimore, have shut down or shifted to natural gas. And so things are moving in a right direction. Without the Supreme Court decision, the market is pushing things toward cleaner energy. But this limits the ability of EPA to regulate power plants for greenhouse gas emissions and to push the shift to renewable energy or to change the energy form. It does not eliminate the powers of the Clean Air Act to protect our health and to set standards for clean air. So EPA still has potent weaponry to really drill down on coal-burning power plants because they, in addition to carbon dioxide and the greenhouse gases, let's face it, they emit a lot of mercury and arsenic. And just the coal ash alone has been a national tragedy, with the disposal of coal ash contaminating groundwater and waterways throughout the country. So it's good. I mean, I know the whaling industry probably had the same pangs when we shifted away from whale oil for lighting and energy, right? But the time has come. And frankly, the energy industry knows that.
So you are sounding a little bit hopeful. And I, after reading everything I read every day, feel like the world is ending. So please talk to me about why you feel hopeful and what can actually be done today.
Great question. There's no doubt about it. The arsenal to fight against climate change has been hurt. It's been hurt by the Supreme Court. It's been hurt by inflation. It's been hurt by the absolute stasis in the Senate over budget. And some things that scare me is if you can't have incentives, for instance, subsidies for electric vehicles, they become unaffordable. And basically, the American public, the world's population loses. But I think that we still have tremendous interest in that. There's something very strange right now. If you poll the American public, and particularly in a week like this, the large majority of the American public are very concerned about climate change, and they want something done. However, they also know that gas was recently $5 a gallon, and inflation is going crazy every time I go to the grocery store. And so they're worried about the economy. So as we face an election, midterms, we have to make choices, and those will be very important. What the Supreme Court has said, the U.S. can make great progress, but we have to have mandates from Congress. We have to be able to unify as a country. The public has to speak out and say, this is really important. And it's so important that we're going to elect officials that are listening to us. Now, there has been a shift. The Republicans no longer they can't deny climate change. But their counter to this is, okay, this is getting serious, but not now. Look at inflation. The American public is in this. That's why the leadership of the states are so important. We know on a local level that there are lots of things that our governors, that our elected officials on the local level can do. There's two big parts of climate change. One is adaptation. I'm from New Jersey. I think everybody knows that. Was an environmental official there, and the beaches are near and dear to me, and they're disappearing. And with extreme events, our coastlines are really in jeopardy. I, as part of the school efforts, was down in Louisiana after Katrina, and you don't have to tell people on the coast that things are changing, but we have to really put that in perspective. So we have to think about adaptation. We have to make smart choices about protecting our populations from the Hurricane Sandys, the Hurricane Katrinas, but even the gradual rise in sea level and the rise, as we see in extreme climate events. We have to deal with understanding vulnerable populations like our kids with asthma. And we can do that on a very local level, from the schools, through parents, and through community and civic approaches. We can also work with our state legislatures to take a look at greenhouse gas emissions in individual states. California and Maryland are among the leaders in this, in taking a look at how we might reduce fracking, reduce emissions from oil and gas exploration, reduce expansion of industries that pump so much greenhouse gases into the air, and then enforce the laws we have. Come on now. Our enforcement for environmental protection is terrible on the state levels, unfortunately, because of lack of resources for enforcement. And on the national level, we can go after this. We can reduce things. And we as a people can be more committed to making change and making sure we have representation that really looks out for our environment and our health. Now, the other big side of that is renewable energy is no longer a dream. Electric vehicles are no longer a dream. Wind power is no longer a dream. We have to make sure that we take advantage of what I think is a real economic opportunity. And the business community and major investment funds are realizing this too, that chemicals, oil and gas are the past. And if you look toward the future, there is a bright future for renewable energy. There is a bright future for reducing emissions. We're in a tough spot right now. There's no doubt about it. This is a tough time. But there are ways, through strong representation, through innovation, that we can see our way out of this. In public health, we're optimistic, right? And I remain optimistic. I think we can have a future. I think we will have to adapt because we're already there with climate change, but it's not all gloom and doom.
Although I did see someone post that as hot as it is now, this is probably the coolest summer for the rest of your life.
That's scary. And if we don't act, absolutely right. Imagine, my heart goes out for the Brits, but they don't have air conditioning. They don't have those resources. And most of our neediest and most vulnerable populations don't have the resources to stay cool. So it's really hot out there and it's really harmful. I really feel for our essential outdoor workers, our kids at camp. So many things right now. I'm worried about my grandkids and, outdoor camps up in Philadelphia and the heat islands of our cities. But things as simple as taking care of heat islands in your community and planting trees. I know that sounds like really old green stuff, right? But man, our own campus in East Baltimore, how many trees are there? So we need some shade. We need to take measures. This is in our hands.
Tom Burke, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Great to be here. And let's think positive about the future.
I'll try.
Public Health on Call is produced by Joshua Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith-Rogers, and Stephanie Desmond. Audio production by J.B. Arbogast, Holly Cardinell, Spencer Greer, and Matthew Martin, with support from Chip Hickey. Distribution by Nick Moran. Production support from Catherine Ricardo. Social media run by Grace Holes Fernandez and Amber Bryan Singletary. Thank you for listening.